The distinction between crimes that are inherently wrong and those that are merely prohibited by statute forms the foundation for understanding certain acts as demanding perpetual accountability. Crimes classified as malum in se are recognized as wrongs in themselves because they violate fundamental principles of human dignity and moral order. These acts stand apart from malum prohibitum offenses, which derive their wrongfulness solely from legislative enactment. The concept of radical evil extends this framework by identifying transgressions that undermine the conditions for human plurality and moral reconciliation. Such offenses render forgiveness conceptually untenable while still requiring punishment, establishing a category of acts that transcend ordinary temporal boundaries in legal accountability. Imprescriptible crimes emerge from this philosophical foundation as offenses exempt from any statute of limitations. The statute of limitations represents a legislatively enacted temporal boundary that bars prosecution or civil claims after a prescribed period. Its absence for select crimes signals a normative judgment that certain transgressions compel perpetual accountability. In this context, treason, murder, and specific forms of child abuse occupy a central position as imprescriptible offenses. Treason and murder carry no statute of limitations under federal and state law when elements are met, while child abuse, particularly sexual offenses against minors, receives elimination or substantial extension of limitations periods in many jurisdictions. Non-sexual physical and medical child abuse typically follow standard felony limitations but can elevate to no statute of limitations when resulting in death or qualifying as sexual abuse. The analysis of major sequential events reveals the necessity for an event-specific jurisprudential framework to delineate crimes within crimes. These events include the COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter domestic terrorist attacks, the stolen election of 2020, border invasion and immigration crimes, CRT and DEI with discrimination against whites, and transsexuality and trans indoctrination of children. Each event functions as a crime in and of itself while generating conspiratorial planning, direct criminal acts, and spillover or cascading crimes. The framework labels these as COVID crimes, BLM crimes, election crimes, border crimes, CRT-DEI crimes, and trans crimes. Within this structure, individual acts are designated as event treason, event murder, or event child abuse. All such designations carry no statute of limitations, ensuring perpetual accountability for the full chain of activity across overlapping events. Philosophical foundations of malum in se and radical evil. Crimes classified as malum in se are inherently evil acts that demand punishment regardless of statutory declaration. These offenses violate fundamental human dignity and the shared moral order that sustains society. Murder, rape, and robbery exemplify malum in se because they are recognized as wrong across societies without need for legislative prohibition. The category contrasts sharply with malum prohibitum offenses, which owe their wrongfulness exclusively to law. This distinction establishes a baseline for identifying acts that require perpetual accountability rather than time-barred resolution. Radical evil extends the malum in se framework by designating acts that destroy the conditions for human plurality and moral reconciliation. Such offenses attack spontaneity and the shared world of distinct individuals, rendering forgiveness ethically untenable even when punishment remains obligatory. Radical evil exceeds ordinary scales of justice because it negates the preconditions for moral repair. In this sense, radical evil creates offenses where traditional notions of proportionality and restoration prove inadequate. The philosophical category aligns with imprescriptible crimes by demanding accountability that transcends temporal limits. The integration of malum in se and radical evil into jurisprudential analysis supports the development of event-specific frameworks. These frameworks treat major sequential crises as encompassing crimes within crimes. Each crisis generates conspiratorial initiation, direct acts, and spillover effects that align with treason, murder, and child abuse. The resulting designations ensure that acts committed under the parameters of these events receive labels that carry no statute of limitations. This structure maintains the philosophical imperative of perpetual accountability while providing precise delineation for complex, overlapping criminal activity. The statute of limitations and imprescriptible offenses. The statute of limitations establishes a legislatively enacted temporal boundary beyond which prosecution or civil claims are barred. The period begins when the offense occurs or, in limited cases, when discovered. Expiration generally prevents legal proceedings even when evidence exists. This mechanism reflects considerations of evidentiary reliability, societal repose, and administrative efficiency. Certain offenses, however, remain exempt from any such boundary. Treason and murder constitute core imprescriptible offenses. Treason, defined constitutionally as levying war against the United States or adhering to enemies while giving them aid and comfort, carries no statute of limitations as a capital offense. Murder, defined as unlawful killing with malice aforethought, similarly has no statute of limitations for capital or first-degree forms under federal and state law. Child abuse exhibits differentiated treatment. Sexual offenses against minors receive elimination or substantial extension of limitations periods in most jurisdictions because of delayed disclosure patterns. Non-sexual physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and medical child abuse follow standard felony limitations with minority tolling or limited discovery rules unless resulting in death. The framework of event-specific crimes builds upon these imprescriptible categories by designating acts within major sequential events as event treason, event murder, or event child abuse. This approach acknowledges that real crimes occurred under the parameters of each event but received practical immunity due to surrounding circumstances. The designations apply uniformly to conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects. No statute of limitations attaches to any act labeled under the framework, ensuring perpetual accountability across the sequential chain of crises. Constitutional parameters of treason and event application. Treason consists only in levying war against the United States or adhering to enemies while giving them aid and comfort. Conviction requires two witnesses to the same overt act or confession in open court. Levying war requires an actual assemblage of persons using force against U.S. authority. Adhering to enemies demands intent to betray combined with tangible assistance to a foreign power in open hostilities. The constitutional text permits broad application, while judicial interpretation maintains strict parameters. The event-specific framework operates within this constitutional foundation by labeling coordinated acts within crises as event treason when they undermine constitutional order or give aid and comfort to hostile forces. The COVID pandemic aligns with this framework through coordinated policies that centralized power and restricted rights. These acts constitute COVID treason when they function as levying war against constitutional principles. BLM domestic terrorist attacks align through coordinated unrest that undermined governmental authority and domestic tranquility. The stolen election aligns through actions that subverted the constitutional electoral system. Border invasion aligns through policies that failed to protect against invasion. CRT-DEI and discrimination against whites align through institutional subversion of equal protection. Trans indoctrination aligns through policies that undermine family structures protected by constitutional order. Each event generates direct acts and spillover effects labeled as event treason. The framework treats these designations as carrying no statute of limitations. This structure delineates crimes within crimes while maintaining perpetual accountability. The sequential nature of the crises ensures that treasonous acts in one event feed directly into subsequent events, creating a continuous chain of imprescriptible offenses. Hypothetical event-specific labeling and sequential order. The hypothetical framework designates each crisis as an event crime containing conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects. The COVID pandemic begins the sequence as COVID crime, encompassing conspiracy to amplify parameters, direct imposition of mandates, and spillover coercion that fed later unrest. BLM domestic terrorist attacks follow as BLM crime, with conspiracy through institutional support, direct violence, and spillover erosion of law enforcement that enabled the stolen election. The stolen election constitutes election crime, with conspiracy in administration mechanisms, direct irregularities, and spillover loss of trust that installed subsequent administration policies. Border invasion follows as border crime, with conspiracy in non-enforcement, direct release of unvetted individuals, and spillover exploitation networks. CRT-DEI and discrimination against whites constitute CRT-DEI crime, with conspiracy through civil rights frameworks, direct institutional discrimination, and spillover community destruction. Transsexuality and trans indoctrination of children complete the sequence as trans crime, with conspiracy in educational and medical policies, direct interventions on minors, and spillover psychological and social harms. The sequential order creates overlapping criminal activity where spillover from one event directly enables the next. Within this framework, every actor receives designation as an event criminal. Specific conduct receives labels of event treason, event murder, or event child abuse. The designations apply uniformly to conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover. No statute of limitations attaches to any labeled act. This structure delineates crimes within crimes across the sequential crises while ensuring perpetual accountability for the full chain of activity. Conspiracy, direct acts, spillover effects, and perpetual accountability. Conspiracy to initiate each event involves long-term networks operating at community, national, and global levels. These networks prepared infrastructure through policy shifts, funding, and ideological alignment over many years. Direct acts within each event include specific policies, mandates, violence, irregularities, and interventions that constituted the focal criminal conduct. Spillover effects encompass persistent harms, secondary crimes, and overlapping activity that flowed from the initial event and merged with subsequent crises. The framework labels all three layers as event treason, event murder, or event child abuse. The sequential chain demonstrates continuous criminal progression. Each event generates spillover that directly contributes to the initiation and execution of the next. This overlapping structure ensures that crimes within crimes remain interconnected across the entire sequence. The framework treats the full chain as imprescriptible by applying event-specific designations uniformly. No statute of limitations applies to any act labeled under the framework. Perpetual accountability arises directly from the imprescriptible nature of the designated crimes. The structure acknowledges that real crimes occurred within each event and received practical immunity due to surrounding circumstances. The event-specific labels provide precise delineation while maintaining no statute of limitations. This framework addresses the full scope of conspiracy, direct acts, spillover, and sequential overlapping activity across all identified crises. Conclusion: Event-specific crimes framework for perpetual accountability in crises. The jurisprudential framework of event-specific crimes provides a coherent structure for addressing sequential crises through designations that carry perpetual accountability. Each event functions as a crime in and of itself while generating conspiratorial planning, direct criminal acts, and spillover effects. The sequential order from the COVID pandemic through trans indoctrination reveals continuous overlapping criminal activity where spillover from one crisis enables the next. The framework labels all layers as event treason, event murder, or event child abuse, ensuring no statute of limitations attaches to any designated act. The philosophical foundations of Malum in Se and Radical Evil support this approach by identifying acts that demand accountability beyond temporal boundaries. The statute of limitations analysis confirms that treason, murder, and child abuse occupy imprescriptible categories when elements are met. The constitutional parameters of treason provide the textual basis for labeling coordinated acts within crises as event-specific treason. The resulting designations delineate crimes within crimes and criminals within those crimes with precision. This framework maintains perpetual accountability for the full chain of activity across the sequential crises. It acknowledges the occurrence of real crimes that received practical immunity while providing clear labels for conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects. The event-specific structure ensures comprehensive coverage of all parameters, networks, and overlapping activity without temporal extinguishment. The designations of COVID crime, BLM crime, election crime, border crime, CRT-DEI crime, and trans crime, together with their treason, murder, and child abuse variants, establish a unified jurisprudential mechanism for addressing the entire sequence as imprescriptible offenses.